Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first installment of my short YouTube series, Insane Streaming Setup. So, first couple of words about me, right? So, I casually stream video games, both regular and VR, and I also do a YouTube series on synthesizers, which I do completely in Czech language, which is my native language. And I do not do a lot of post-processing, so I rely heavily on basically processing the video as I record it in OBS. So this series will assume at least a general knowledge about OBS, which is the streaming software. That's probably the de facto standard of streamers, at least the advanced ones. And so I will be using this software throughout the whole series and demonstrating stuff right on it, basically live. So there will be probably minimal post-processing to these videos. But let's get into it, right? So as you can see, I have OBS here, and you might have noticed that I have disabled the previews to basically prevent that screen door effect where you got a window and inside that you got a window and inside that, like the infinite hall of mirrors effect, they also call that. And tonight we will be talking about webcams. So the webcam I'm streaming from here is a very peculiar item. So first of all, let's start about webcams in general, right? So they're just devices to convert video into a computer signal. So basically there's a sensor in every webcam, and it picks up the light that comes to it, and basically the light travels through a lens of some sort, and then finally when it reaches the chipset, it's converted into ones and zeros, probably also encoded to some more modern format, because most of the webcams are USB 2, and that has a very limited bandwidth for video. So you might think that USB 2 to 480 megabits is actually enough, but it is not. Well, let me try to calculate some stuff, right? I got a Windows calculator here, and I apologize for everything being in Czech language, but I am sure you will be able to figure it out. So let's assume you want to stream full HD, right? So that's 1920 by 1080. So this is the sheer number of pixels that we are trying to push through. So that's 2 megapixels, right? Then basically each pixel has 3 color components, RGB. So that's each of those components, let's assume, has 1 byte. So that's like 8-bit picture per color. In total, 24-bit picture. So that's times 3. So this is 6 megabytes of data, 6.2 or maybe like 6.1, I think, because 1 megabyte is 1024 kilobytes, right? And etc. In the next order. But then let's assume it's like 6 megabytes. So 6 megabytes of data per frame. And then imagine you want to do that 60 times per second, because you want that very, very smooth, fluid motion, right? And already you're pushing 373 megabytes per second. But the problem is the USB 2 bandwidth is only 480 megabits, which is 8 times less, because bits are just ones and zeros, whereas bytes are 0 to 255. So we need to multiply this by 8 to get it to the bits, and suddenly you're streaming 2.9 gigabits per second. And that's something that USB 2 is unable to handle. So we need some kind of compression, and usually the cameras convert this to MJPEG. There are some modes that you can switch your camera to that transfer the data in it's YUV2 instead of MJPEG, which does not have any compression artifacts, because MJPEG is just motion JPEG, right? So it's just like a bunch of JPEGs in consecutive order. And that of course introduces some artifacts, but the YUV does not do that, but it requires this much bandwidth, and so you will only be able to get limited frames. Let me start over, right? So let's go with the same resolution here, then 3 colors per pixel, so 6 megabytes of data per frame. And then let's try to figure out how many frames, how many FPS we can theoretically squeeze into the USB 2 bandwidth. So I'm gonna copy this number into my clipboard and then go with, so we got this theoretical maximum of 400 megabits. Let's turn it into kilobits and finally bits. Then let's divide it by 8 to turn it into bytes. And we're talking about 62 megabytes per second, right? So if we now divide this by the number that we have previously saved, we're reaching 10 FPS. So 10 FPS is not a lot. Right now you're watching, if you're watching the video in a correct format on YouTube, you're watching this 60 FPS and you can see my hand movement and my facial movement is basically butter smooth. That's because my camera can do 60 FPS. And of course it's doing that by utilizing compression. So that's how video actually gets from the physical world to your computer, right? So it gets digitized into the raw format and then it gets compressed, or it does not, and then you're hitting limited FPS. So if we open my camera here, open just the properties, and if we go here to configure video, let me grab this window right there. Again, I apologize for everything being in Czech, but I will translate this for you. So every video input device in OBS has this window. It's a generic Windows 10 window that handles video sources. And you got the brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, sharpness, gamma correction, white balance. This is backlight correction, which in this case does nothing. And then there's gain and color enable. Sometimes these are disabled depending on whether the camera driver actually supports them or not. Finally, you got flicker correction or compensation. This is mostly irrelevant by modern standards because modern households use LED panels, which do not have the general flicker of the old incandescent lights that were basically flickering in the sinusoidal wave of the power network, whereas the LEDs either give out a constant light, or if they are somehow regulated, they are mostly pulse width regulated, which means they are basically, instead of going like a sine wave, like going bright and then not and then bright again, they are like flashing for a few milliseconds they flash the maximum intensity, and then for another a few milliseconds they just like go out completely. And so like I said, this is irrelevant. And then there is some kind of other options that you have here. As you can see, my camera only supports exposure here, whereas I have another one that I will show you that also supports focus. Okay, so let's talk about common problems that you can have with cameras. As you can see, I'm streaming, basically it's night, and you can probably tell I have a light before in front of me because you can see me very clearly. So if let me switch back to the camera. If I turn the light off, you can see that I'm very dark, but you can see my movement is still very smooth. It's still that 60 FPS that I'm recording. And the reason for this is that my camera allows me to set a fixed exposure. That's probably the biggest problem that you're going to face with your cameras, a lack of light. So the problem is that if there is not enough light, the picture is dark, and that's not what you want. So the camera can compensate for low light conditions in two ways. Either you can open the aperture on the camera, which gives it more light, allows it to collect more light by simply there being a bigger hole through which the light can land on the chip. Or you can increase the exposure. And the exposure here, as I've shown you before, is this option. Now, exposure is a time information. So it says how long is each frame scanned. So basically how long the camera takes to scan one frame, one picture. So right now we're running at 60 FPS. So as you can see, if I increase this one-fold, it's still pretty smooth, right? Now let me increase it one more. See, right now the picture got brighter, but I'm also losing a lot of that frame rate, because now the camera simply cannot do this 60 times per second. Capturing one frame takes more than the 1/60th of a second. So now I'm probably running like 15 FPS, I would guess, something like that. Let's increase it even further. Now we are getting very bright here, and we can go 2 more, I think. Oh no, just 1 more. And this is now ridiculously bright for how dim my room actually is. And just the simple fact that the camera can do this is very good, because that means that it's got a very sensitive chipset. What I can, sensitive sensor, sorry. What I can do is I can even open the aperture and push it even further. So this is maximum aperture control. Now you might be wondering, how am I able to control aperture on a camera, right? And like I said, we will get to that, because I'm not using an ordinary webcam that you can just buy like off the shelf. But it's a webcam that you can offer very easily. So now it's probably a good time to show you what I'm working with here. I'm going to open my browser and switch the scene so you can see this. So this is the camera that I'm using. It's obtained from AliExpress, and it's manufactured by the brand ELP, which if I understand correctly, in China they pronounce it Alipu. And I got this 2.8 to 12 millimeter lens version, because you can have different versions here. You can have like no lens version. So this big part that looks like a camera objective or camera lens is the lens part, whereas the box that's connected to it is the camera itself. Now let's talk about this camera for a second, okay? So it's a USB 3.0 camera, which means it can support higher frame rates. And the thing that should give of how good the camera is going to be is this, because the IMX291 is an excellent chipset. Basically, it's used in many dash cams, and it can produce very good picture, and it's very sensitive in low light conditions. So this is basically the top that you can get in like a common consumer grade webcam. Although this particular brand is aimed at more like industrial usages, as you can see here. They also have like cameras that do not even have a case. But I'm very glad they produce also some for the consumer market, as it's very handy for content creation, as you can see. So this camera, at the bottom, it's got the tripod mount, that classic. I think it's like 3/8 of an inch screw. And just look at the sheer size of that sensor. You do not see such a thing on a common webcam. This is considered a very big sensor for webcam standards. And that's the reason why it can work so well in low light conditions. So then you have also the lens itself, which is also an excellent quality. As you can see, you got 3 things that you can configure on the lens, right? You got this oh, I think I got a different lens because I got these items reversed. But you got the distance, which is basically your zoom, and on the 2.8 up till 12 millimeters, this is at the bottom. So first you adjust the zoom, then you adjust the clarity, which is your manual focus, and that is the reason why when I go back into OBS and try to configure my camera here and try to configure the focus here, I cannot do that. The reason for it is simply the camera does not possess an automatic or electronic focus function, but you need to do it manually. Now I have kind of skipped talking about the aperture, because so the thing is that the stuff that you turn on the lens is very finicky, and I already got it pretty well adjusted, and I do not want to mess up my configuration, my setup here. So the only thing I'm able to safely manipulate is the aperture. And if you played some of the Portal or Portal 2, you probably know how the aperture looks like. Like it's like a hole that basically can shrink or enlarge just by turning it. And by doing that, you can manipulate how much light does reach your sensor. So I can like manually change the brightness of the picture, because the exposure that you configure in the driver, that only goes by certain steps, right? So this might be not enough and this might be too much. So I can compensate for this too much option by simply turning down the aperture, and now we got even brighter picture, but still not overexposed, which is something we want to avoid. So let me get this back. Generally, when you have the ability to get more light into the sensor, that's a preferred choice compared to increasing the exposure. Of course, on a regular webcam, you do not have such options. You have autofocus, which will basically focus on, well, basically you can probably set it manually in the driver, but that's that. Then you have the exposure if you are lucky on your webcam, and then you do not have the aperture control. So basically the aperture of the lens of the common webcam is fully open at all times, and you cannot increase it in any way. Okay, so right now let's compare it to this webcam, because I was using this webcam before, and let me tell you, looking at the picture, it is not a bad picture. It is still a very good webcam, right? So this is the Logitech C922, and it's considered the golden standard of let's say advanced streaming, right? Basically this is the most sought after webcam for streaming, at least for full HD. The problem with this webcam is that it can only produce 60 FPS in 720p, which might not be enough resolution if you're streaming. Like if you're streaming like here, like just in a corner, then it's okay. That this doesn't matter if it's 720p, because it's getting shrinked anyway. But if you're streaming full screen, then you either have 720p at 60 FPS, or you have full HD, but you only have that in 30 FPS. So let me show you a comparison, right? Where I'll be just moving my hand here, and you can see how butter smooth the picture is on my streaming webcam compared to the Logitech, right? The Logitech is much more jittery, and it is pretty clear that it is operating at only 30 FPS. So I mean, this might not be of any concern to you if you're streaming at 30 FPS your whole stream, but if you have a generous bandwidth, especially your upload bandwidth from your internet provider, then you're able to use that bandwidth to stream 60 FPS, which is much more enjoyable to watch, especially for computer games where smoothness is basically the most sought after detail. And now let's see how the camera reacts to the low light conditions, right? So let me turn off the light again, and I will try to increase the exposure of my webcam until it starts slowing down the frame rate, right? So here is already slowed down. So here it's still butter smooth. It's still running at 60. Now let's do the same for the Logitech, right? Again, go into configure video, and we will go here and try to increase this brightness. So as you can see already, we got basically two equally bright pictures, and already the Logitech is going, I would guess, 15 FPS. So if I was to match that with my webcam, I will configure it here. Okay, now basically both are equally smooth, and you can see that my webcam is much brighter and gives off much better picture. And this is the advantage of having a big chip on a webcam. That basically means that you're able to stream in any light conditions and the picture is just going to be perfect. Now mind you, I'm still illuminated by my monitor, so I might try turning it off for a while, although I might probably mess up my resolution, so I don't want to do that. But even like this, you clearly see how much of a difference this is. And okay, let me turn the light off back on, and I'm gonna reduce this, and of course I wanna return the Logitech to its original position as well. Probably here, I think is the correct setting. So now we're comparing the two webcams, and let's just see the differences, right? Let me first put the Logitech on full screen. So this is really a nice picture, but you can see it's still a webcam. So the sensor is incredibly small, and therefore the picture lacks the sharpness, the clarity. And you can see there is a a lot of post-processing on it. For example, check out my 5 o'clock shade here, right? I mean, it's after 9, so let's call it 9 o'clock shade. But here you can see it kind of gets blurred into different strains, and my face looks overly smooth. My face does not look like that. Let me tell you, I'm 30 years old. I know what my face looks like, and it's not this smooth. Whereas where I'm using this let's say semi-professional industrial webcam from ELP, it's very, very sharp. And of course, I was trying to match these cameras in configuration, so I've tried to sync the hue and white balance and even the sharpness in OBS. Actually, on the ELP cam, I'm using a little bit of the sharpness filter. When I turn it off, it's a little bit blurry, but I felt it's fair to do that because the Logitech cam basically has an internal post-processing that's handled by the driver that the ELP cam does not. So I'm basically giving it a fair amount of advantage to match the possibilities of both webcams. Now let's go back to my screen here and let's see what we can do, what we can have on the Logitech cam, right? Let me open up this setting here and now switch the scene back so you can see it. So again, we got the brightness and contrast. We do not have the hue configuration, so that's kind of interesting. Then of course we got the saturation and sharpness. Again, we are lacking gamma correction, but we got white balance, so that's nice, and we can turn off the auto. And yeah, my dishwasher just finished. And then we got the gain, so that's something we can configure and use it a little to compensate between individual steps of the exposure. Now going back here, we got quite a lot of stuff. So this is a zoom function that actually does not for some reason now work, but it's basically just a software one, so it does nothing. Then we got this focus that I disabled automatic because I only want it to be fixed at 0. Watch what happens when I try to turn this up, right? And this is for basically like macro level stuff, right? Here, if I move my hand very close, it's going to be sharp at some point. So if you try to film yourself doing some kind of electronics work, when you're, for example, soldering or something like that, then you can use this focus function to adjust it by software. Of course, if you were to use my ELP cam for such occasions, you would simply do this by turning the wheels on the lens to produce the correct result that you want. Finally, you have some kind of stuff that I was not even using. Doesn't look like it's affecting anything. So yeah, we're just gonna skip that. It's probably some effects, just post-processing software effects. Of course, we can set the exposure to be automatic, which sometimes will work. But then if we turn the light off, it will. Oh, what do you know? It's still pretty decent. Sometimes, and that's the worst problem here, right? Sometimes it just fucks it up. Sometimes it just the automatic expo. Oh, now there we go. Now we're losing frame rate. You see, before we did not have that problem, and that's probably my biggest concern here, because this compensation of low light and this configuration of manual exposure and and auto exposure is very finicky. It does not stay consistent when you're using it. So when I was using this webcam for my streaming, it was very annoying to use that. Basically, it was pain in the ass. I was trying to do it. I was trying to like configure it, and every time it would behave differently. And the driver that comes with the webcam doesn't help, cause sometimes, actually I had it like do a blue screen on me because it's got like a kernel level driver. So it's really just used like a plug and play option, right? You just plug it and it mostly works, unless you really want to figure something special out and really like set it up in a very custom way, which this ELP cam certainly allows you to do, and it's much better in this regard. So just so you know, I'm basically probably like 40% zoomed in on the lens, so I could do a much wider picture. And for this, I got a different cam from also the same brand, from ELP, So I can show you the picture here, but as you can see, the sensor is not a very good one, and it does not work very well in low light conditions. It still gives off 60 FPS, but I need to crank up my light panel to maximum brightness to be able to see something. But you can still see it's butter smooth, it's running at 60 FPS, so that's something you want. And I use this camera mostly for streaming VR, because this is the room I work in. And also you got an opportunity to see what streaming on a budget looks like, right? Because this is also my living room. You can see the vacuum cleaner is also, my kitchen is in the background. So really, I am trying to teach you how to stream on a budget from home. So yeah, let's get back here, right? So this was probably most of the stuff that you can configure on webcams. Maybe one more thing that I want to show you. If you double click the webcam configure and don't go into configure video, but instead you stay on the screen, there is a couple of stuff that you can configure here. So the resolution here, right? You always want to set this to custom, because then you can configure all the resolutions that the camera supports. Sometimes they might not be in the list, but you can type them in manually, and the camera will just catch up and give you the picture in the exact resolution that you're asking. Now FPS, this is basically how many frames you want from the camera. As you can see here, this camera only does 60. So the Logitech, you can actually configure it to a lot of different FPS options. Well, this one is just built for 60 FPS, and that's that. But you can also see that it's giving me the 60 FPS now, but if I switch from MJPEG, because this is what I was talking about at the beginning, right? We simply do not, I mean, with USB Type 3, we would theoretically have some bandwidth to support uncompressed Full HD 60p video, but I don't think the camera actually has sufficient chipset to handle that much data, so they're still doing this with MJPEG. If I go into YUV, you can see the frame rate dropped significantly. Like it's giving me 5. So that's the maximum frame rate that you are able to use. And you can also see like this effect that you are observing right now is called rolling shutter. And rolling shutter is basically de facto standard of all webcams. And let me just switch back to MJPEG so you can see me more smoothly. So rolling shutter is a function of how the sensor captures the frame. So a global shutter, which you could find on an analog camera with an actual physical film, would be that there is a flash of the aperture that simply opens and closes, or the lens, and that lets all the light in at the single moment. Whereas the digital camera basically has individual pixels on the sensor, and it's basically scanning the picture top to bottom. And now imagine there's a wild movement here, right? So the camera is scanning and you have your hand here, but you're slowly moving it. So as the camera continues scanning, your hand is at a different location at each consecutive scanned line. And so that produces these wiggly lines. It's the same effect as when you're trying to record on your camera, for example, a fastly spinning wheel or a motor of, or like an engine of an aeroplane. So that's the same effect, and you can simply find it on YouTube. Maybe I'll put some links below on how the rolling shutter looks like, but that's what it's called. And you could clearly see that when I switch it to the YUV, the effect is more pronounced, because it's just trying to, like, it's capturing the data from the sensors more slowly, right? So that's the problem with the rolling shutter, and we will be actually talking about this in our next installment, which is going to be about lighting, because as you can probably see, I'm using an LED panel to light my scene here, and that's what I am turning on and off here. And in a similar way as the webcams, they tend to be very expensive, but also you can get away with a nice DIY solution that's probably going to set you back less. Oh fuck, my English is trash. But anyway, this was just about the cameras, so you will have to wait until my next episode. But thank you for watching. I'm hoping I'm giving you some good information here about streaming and setup, and just hit subscribe so you don't miss my next episode. Bye.